Just read my lips. I live here.
Hello YouTube, this is DVD Review Studios here, and today we shall be discussing a series that has really captured people's interest over the past few weeks. Many have chosen to ignore the show out of respect to the families affected, and others have instead decided to watch it really out of morbid curiosity. And that show is Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, which was released onto Netflix in September 2022. And usually the show is just simply referred to as Dahmer, which is a real crime drama series and a biopic vision of Jeffrey Dahmer's life, dramatizing the horrific crimes committed by this cannibalistic serial killer. And show creator Ryan Murphy wanted this story to be told from the victim's point of view without glorifying Dahmer, but I honestly feel the series really has done the opposite, arguably going as far to incorrectly exalt this individual for entertainment purposes. The show in itself is very popular. It's known as one of the most popular Netflix shows of all time, appearing as the second most watched English language series in an opening release week, which was following closely behind Stranger Things Season 4. And knowing this series is based on a harrowingly true story, I can respect people choosing not to watch this limited series. Separating the dramatization from the vicious reality is hard enough, but it's made all the more difficult by the level of realism expressed in the production, and in particular, the acting. Evan Peters, who plays Jeffrey Dahmer, delivers one of his best performances, where the writing really allows for a mixed audience response, and that's going to be the purpose of this video. As the episodes go on, people have expressed unsettling feelings towards Dahmer, and it's a guilty admission, but at certain points, I even felt sorry for this monster. I would argue that is exactly what the creators wanted to do, manipulating the viewer into sympathizing with Dahmer despite everything that he has done. And this is a huge credit to the writing talents, where it becomes really difficult to fully despise this man as the protagonist. Analysing this performance with the limited dialogue, Evan Peters really does give himself over to the on-screen depiction of Jeffrey Dahmer by showing every unsettling emotion in his body language, making this portrayal all the more disturbing, especially with the monotone voice. And his acting is a huge credit to the overall unsettling experience, and the claustrophobic way the viewer is kind of introduced to this man, especially in the first episode where we visit his apartment for the first time. And I found the character was most interesting in episode 6, titled Silenced. And this is currently the highest rated episode on most review websites, and with good reason. Dahmer is, understandably as a character, too far gone by this point in the series from redeeming himself in any way, but at very select moments he does show signs of regret for his murderous actions. And with this in mind, I really like how the show tries to put more emphasis on explaining why he decided to harm others in such a horrific way. His sanity is often brought into question multiple times, of which he argues that he was of sane mind when acting violently. He was lonely, isolated for large portions of his life, and his upbringing was unpleasant at the best of times, and a lot of this seems kind of cliche in the show's portrayal of making this man into the monster that he is, but seems to hold some form of truth in the realism behind this man as well. And unlike what we have seen previously, Silenced does not completely revolve around Dahmer himself, but instead tells a more personalized story about his 12th victim named Tony Hughes. Providing the audience with important details about Tony Hughes. As a baby, he lost his hearing permanently due to complications with medicine, and this is heavily detailed for the Netflix show, where we see Tony's birth and visits to the doctor's office. And he was also known as being nonverbal or mute, using sign language to communicate with his family and friends, where actor Rodney Burford, who portrays Tony, is partially deaf in real life, which adds to the complexities of this role. And despite being, for the most part, a nonverbal performance, his expressions and mannerisms are absolutely incredible, where his gesturing is phenomenal, seeing both a sweet and vulnerable side to this man. Both in real life and as part of the series, the man was last seen in May 1991 and reported missing, where his family pleaded with the authorities to find him to no avail, where a missing persons case was not prioritized. An ongoing theme expressed throughout the series is racial segregation and oppression by the police force, and it's made to be very clear as a social issue which is still relevant to this day. And although it has been argued that Jeffrey Dahmer's chosen victims were not influenced by race, the series does make this a focal point by looking at how the police handled the Dahmer case, where we see the cops turn a blind eye to very obvious signs of distress from certain people.
Like I said, we'll look into it.
I'm not asking you to look into it. I'm asking you to go and stop this guy.
And in other instances, we see the cops deliberately target people with racial abuse, where the theme remains consistent throughout the entire series.
Hello?
Why don't you take that $850,000 and get on a nice big fucking plane and go back to the fucking jungle, you slanty-eyed piece of shit.
With this in mind, the heartfelt opening adds a lot to the episode by illustrating the struggles Tony was able to overcome, matched with a coming-of-age theme, and I really like how this gave us more exposition to him as a person, which is furthered by the conversations done with sign language. And thankfully, subtitles are added for the benefit of the viewer, where we learn about Tony's dreams, such as wanting to be part of a modeling career, how he was hoping to find true love. And it's painful to see this innocence portrayed on screen, knowing where it's all inevitably going to end. Like many of the characters featured, Tony was confirmed to be a gay man, and towards the very beginning we see him dancing at clubs, making conversation with other men, and it's addressed very early on, using diegetic sound, where muffling this shows how Tony may have felt while at the club. He still enjoys the surroundings, even though he cannot hear what's going on, and the fact that this didn't hold him back is an admirable quality to his character. In the previous episode, Blood on Their Hands, Dahmer is arrested for molestation charges and serves a year in prison, and he is released and meets with his father, who is very strict about the living arrangements going forward. Jeff can no longer live with his grandma and is given 1 week to find his own place, and with this time jump, this is where we are shown the apartment building heavily featured throughout most episodes. And shown at the very end of this episode, it concludes with Dahmer having already met Tony in the process of bringing him back to his apartment. And episode 6 bridges the gap to this exact moment, and having seen the struggles and triumphs Tony has gone through already, the direction of where this is going is clear as we await his meeting with Jeff. Getting to this precise moment was slower, but with good reason to establish Tony's backstory before we see him meet Jeff for the first time. And this is important to building their relationship, and by focusing on Tony, the inevitable self-destruction of Jeffrey Dahmer is all the more fascinating, and it's a scene that will stay with me for a very long time. And in episode 6, we don't even see Dahmer until about a third of the way in. Tony is pushed into talking with Dahmer, who is looking at him across the club dance floor, and when they eventually do start a conversation, Jeff is accepting of Tony, understanding that he is deaf. And when they continue their fun long into the night, when ordering drinks, this is usually when Jeff would spike his victim's drink, and although we see him intending to do exactly this, he changes his mind, and I really like how this struggle is documented for the series. We see a clear inner conflict from Jeff's facial expressions, and behaving more cautiously, Tony plays hard to get with Jeff, agreeing that they will see one another again, but he refuses to stay the night with him. With a brief time jump, we see how Jeff and Tony become much closer, where the show goes out of its way to romanticize their relationship, and how true this actually is to real life is very much up for debate. For the Netflix show, it's enough to cement that Jeff is living with his previous regrets, having now found somebody that could genuinely make him happy. And spending a lot of time with Tony, we see Jeff getting his life together. He stops drinking alcohol alone, he looks healthier, his clothing is more appealing, which becomes most relevant during the apartment scene. And this is where his father and Sherry visit, and he makes an effort to show just how well that he is doing, that he feels accomplished, and managing to capture his father's pride, who is at an absolute loss for words, of this transformation. Jeff finally admits that he is happy.
Gosh. I'm happy.
That's good.
It was at this exact moment I could see how the writers were really attempting to make Jeff appear regretful for his actions as though he could potentially move on. And I love how he refers to Tony, describing him as a good friend, whilst the scene flashes bits of the nightclub, interrupting the apartment setting, and eventually this scene takes over. And it's extremely unusual to see Jeff content with a relationship, where this sequence eventually does end where it all began for us, the audience, where we see a continuation of the scene from the end of episode 5, as Jeff finally brings Tony back to his apartment. Once again, Jeff is conflicted. While Tony checks out the fish tank, he pours the drinks, and again he has an internal struggle over drugging his new friend. And he thinks about it while cautiously looking over his shoulder, but thankfully does not go through with it. And spending time together, Jeff shows Tony something that is very personal to him, and that is the board game that he supposedly came up with called Infinity Land. Again, whether or not this is actually true to the real-life events is unknown. Personally, I doubt it, and when Jeff explains the rules, I can't help but think this game is a metaphor for Jeff becoming close with another being. Just like in the game rules, if two player pieces get too close together, they will be sucked into a vortex, and I can't help but think this kind of relates to Dahmer's chaotic interactions with people, and how getting too close to someone results in a brutal murder. And this is purely just speculation and my own interpretation of this scene, of which I am sure there are many different ways to look at this sequence in their own unique ways. When playing the game, the inevitable happens where the two pieces end upon the same spot of the game board. And Jeff is about to swipe them off the board, but Tony stops him, grabbing his hand, and I like to think of this as another metaphor, a force for change where he could be unintentionally changing Dahmer without even realizing what he's gotten himself into, as Tony writes a note saying that they can make their own rules, where the two do finally spend the night together. And even though Jeff seems satisfied with the arrangement, the morning after has been seen time and time again as a struggle. Tony is very quick to leave, needing to be on time for work, a concept that Jeff doesn't really seem to understand. And when someone leaves, he kind of takes this personally, as though he has done something wrong. And one key element raised from the morning conversation is the concept of trust, something Jeff is severely lacking when it comes to getting close to another person. Sadly, this is where things turn nasty between Jeff and Tony without him even realizing it. And similar to previous moments where Jeff struggles to drug him, we see a similar internal conflict build where he conceals a blood-stained hammer behind his back. All seems well when Tony does thankfully leave the apartment unscathed, if it weren't for the fact that he had left his keys behind. And between the final act, we see Tony's mother report her son as missing to the police, that he did not come home and that he was not in contact with her or any of his siblings. And when the police stop searching, the shared community aim to find Tony, and when Jeff sees what's going on, it tips him over the edge, completing his path of self-destruction where he curses his own wrongdoings. And very little is known about the death of Tony Hughes. And so when showing his demise at the hands of Dahmer, it mostly happens off-screen. As Jeff trembles at the door while Tony's looking for his keys, you can see the change of heart occur. He scrunches up the note given to him and brutally murders the poor man. I both despise and value the work behind this scene. It ends very suddenly, cutting to the quiet corridor outside the apartment, where all that can be heard is a baby crying as though the innocence of Tony Hughes has just left the world for good. Wrapping my thoughts on the episode and the show generally, this was honestly just sad, where you see the lengths the show creators have gone to in order to dramatize such a horrific story. And while I can appreciate the efforts, for a biopic that's supposed to tell the story of each victim, I can't help but feel this was given the Hollywood treatment for the sake of telling an emotionally complex story. And outside of the Netflix series, Tony Hughes' mother has gone on record about the events depicted in this show not being accurate, where she has politely declined to elaborate further for obvious reasons. And with criticism from victims who still continue to suffer, the distinction between the dramatization of the Netflix show and the realism has ultimately been blurred by this series. And it's interesting to note how the series has used the real-life names of the victims and the family members involved. It's been well documented that the mother of Tony Hughes has condemned the series for being made in the first place, and where the mother goes on to state it didn't happen like that, her bewilderment of the series using their names and publicly showing off their personal tragedy is justified in my opinion. It's a horrific situation to be in, where this family is forced to relive this tragedy for the sake of entertainment. And on that note, thank you for watching this video looking at episode 6 of the Dahmer Netflix series titled Silence. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this episode and the show in general, or if you've never seen the series, is that a personal choice perhaps? I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And of course, for more content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.